Corlin. Taoiseach, yesterday the Taoiseach accepted that 40,000 homes were not delivered last year. The truth is that we had the two most senior politicians in the government, the Taoiseach and you, Taoiseach, running around the country claiming that you would deliver 40,000 homes last year, a claim that you knew not to be true. At the same time, data from the ESRI and the Central Bank was clearly showing that you were on course for failure. But even worse, in October, in the lead into the general election, the CSO published the actual completion data for Q3, which made it clearer than ever that you didn't have a snowball chance in hell of delivering 40,000 homes last year. That report in October, Taoiseach, was damning, and there was nobody in industry, in housing policy or across the opposition who believed that anything close to 40,000 homes would be delivered. But you and the Taoiseach chose to ignore and dismiss us in opposition, the CSO, the Central Bank and the ESRI in a deliberate attempt to mislead the public in advance of a general election. And you did all of this because you wanted to create a narrative that your housing policies were working when clearly they were not. And what is your real record, Taoiseach? Runaway housing prices, sky-high rents, missing all of your social and affordable housing targets, and a homelessness crisis that should make you and all in government hang their heads in shame. Yet despite all of that, you decided to consciously, knowingly and deliberately use inaccurate numbers to mislead the public on what is your greatest failure in housing. And the problem, Ceann Comhairle, is that this tactic has been a hallmark of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil in government. Simon Coveney misled on housing delivery. Owen Murphy misled on the number of people becoming homeless. Darragh O'Brien misled on the number of housing completions. More stroke politics of the highest order. Taoiseach, it is time to stop misleading the public and time to accept that your housing plan is clearly not working. We need a completely new approach to housing. And no doubt, as you have done in the past, you will dismiss Sinn Féin's detailed plan on housing to your cost and to the cost of people who desperately need housing and real change. But you can't so easily dismiss your own Housing Commission's report, which called for a radical reset of policy. It seems to me, Taoiseach, that all of the experts know what needs to be done, but it is you and your government who have your heads in the sand. The sorry fact of the matter is also that your threadbare programme for government does not even mention the Housing Commission or any of its recommendations. It seems you're oblivious to it. It doesn't matter. Creating false narratives, misleading the public is more important to you and your government than actually listening to the housing experts and dealing with the housing crisis. And I have to say, Taoiseach, you were up to your neck in this. The misleading claims of 40,000 new homes last year was hardwired into your election messaging. You knew it was inaccurate. You knew you were misleading. The facts didn't matter. You and Micheál Martin, in my view, set out to mislead the public to win votes. The aim here was to make sure that the public heard 40,000 new homes as many times as possible, regardless of whether it was true or not. Your spin, your sloganeering and your failure on housing has a very real impact on people's everyday lives. You misled because neither of you could really face your record of dismal failure. You misread, obviously, during the election campaign on housing figures, but also on the Occupied Territories Bill, even on the future of a United Ireland, all promises which are now, it seems, in the bin. So, Taoiseach, will you accept that you misled the public on your housing record, and will you finally commit, as was set out by the Housing Commission and by others, by Sinn Féin and others in opposition, to a radical reset of housing policy?
Well, thanks very much, Ceann Comhairle. Firstly, I don't need to dismiss the Sinn Féin housing policy because the people of Ireland did, and you did indeed. Sorry, Ceann Comhairle,
do you want to hear the answer, please? Please, deputies.
Because you must be one of the only opposition parties in the European Union to actually see your vote collapse in the general election, down by 5.5%. You lost the election. No, he doesn't need any help. He did a very good job. Sorry, we've yet to meet, so if you could not shout at me, thanks, that'd be great. So look, this is a very serious issue, though, and I want to repeat an issue that is serious, deserves a serious response. When I was elected leader of my own party, and then Taoiseach less than a year ago, I made it very clear that we all needed to work together to fix housing for once and for all. We absolutely do. And at the start of this new Dáil, we shouldn't seek to divide on this matter. We should actually seek to come into these houses with constructive ideas as to how we can do more together to ensure that we actually get the aspiration of people wanting to own their own home being realised for more and more people, that we get people out of the box rooms in their mums and their dads' homes, and that we give them that ability to own their own home as well. That's what we've got to do. Just over 7,000 homes were being built after the financial crash year, just over 7,000 homes. And working together with colleagues in the last government, we've gotten this up to a situation of now more than 30,000 per year. And yes, let's be very clear, Deputy, you're correct. The completion figure...
Answer, please.
Thank you, Ken Corda. The completion figures for last year are disappointing, that is true. But when we look at the last 3 years together, we have significantly exceeded the housing targets that were set, significantly exceeded them in 2022, significantly exceeded them in 2023. And we do now have good momentum with over 60,000 commencement notices over the last year. And this will, of course, Count Corla, as night follows day, see that translate into increased completion figures in the time ahead. It does appear that there was some displacement in the market as a result of development levy waivers and water connections, where commencements went up at a higher rate than completions have so far. But under that scheme that we put in place and those measures that we took to reduce the cost of building a home, we now have a very significant pipeline of homes that have been commenced that must be built under the scheme by the end of 2026. They must be built by then, and that is good news to young people and their parents watching in on these proceedings today. Now, of course, we have published a new programme for government. It commits to publishing a new, fully funded, radical and realistic housing plan to get more homes built. We're going to ramp up construction capacity to reach 300,000 new homes by 2030, and we're placing a special emphasis on supporting home ownership. And indeed, not all of the recent housing figures are bad. The Banking and Payments Federation confirmed last week that first-time buyer activity is now at a 16-year high, with over 500 individuals or couples buying their first home last year. These are real people in your constituency and in mine, Deputy. And the outgoing government met and exceeded plenty of other targets in housing, and indeed in many other areas, including employment and job creation as well. So I want to assure people listening at home that we are going to continue to adopt policies that ramp up home building. And I understand that a lot of people are not happy in relation to progress in this area. And we have a lot more work to do. And the Housing Commission do say that, and the Housing Commission are right in relation to that point as well. But rather than point scoring or just throwing rhetoric around the Dáil, we do need to continue to work collectively for better solutions for housing. And you can play a constructive role in that, or you can come in and just throw brickbats. That's up to you as well. Yes, the Minister wrote to me last summer in good faith, outlining what a number of projections available to him, including from Deutsche Bank, said would happen. And of course, that didn't materialise. But this new government is more determined than ever to deliver for the people of Ireland.
Taoiseach.
And your alternative policies didn't convince the people at all.
Deputy Cullinne.
With respect, Taoiseach, what actually collapsed is the figure that you gave to the public of 40,000 down to 29,000. And in fact, what has collapsed is, in my view, your credibility and the credibility of the Taoiseach when it comes to housing matters. Because your record speaks for itself. Every single month we see house prices rising. Every single month we see rents rising. Every single month we see homelessness going up on your watch. And then worse than that, to top it all off, you misled the public, in my view, deliberately and consciously in the run-up to a general election, when even government-funded organisations were telling you that you were wrong. It was again stroke politics by you and the Taoiseach. You're not interested in real solutions. You say you are, and you claim that I'm playing politics. I'm holding you to account for, in my view, misleading the public. But I put it to you earlier that the Housing Commission Your own Housing Commission, independent of all of us, clearly set out the failures of what needs to be done, and you've ignored it as you have ignored Sinn Féin's plan. So I ask you again, will you at least concede that you misled the public, and will you agree to a radical reset in housing policy?
Well, I've already made very clear to you what the programme for government negotiated by parties who won a clear majority with working with independents in the last election, and what we've agreed to do in the programme for government, and that's what our focus is on, moving forward in terms of the delivery of homes with real solutions for people. But if you're seriously suggesting that housing statistics cost you the election, that's a bit ridiculous. People looked at your policies. That's what cost you the election. You wouldn't really own your own home under the Sinn Féin proposed leasehold plan. Do you remember that? Your leader couldn't answer a simple question: will the banks lend to buy a home? And people right across the country. I actually, Ken Corlett, I have to be allowed to speak in this House. We're not getting back to last. Can I speak?
You're not helping, Taoiseach.
Pardon?
Please,
No, I'd like to speak. Thank you. You couldn't clarify that you could even access a loan or a mortgage under your plan. The banks have still not confirmed that. You would have pulled away the first-time buyer scheme, you would scrap the help to buy scheme, and you were going to end the first home bridge the gap scheme. No, you don't like it. You seem to think your job is just to critique. Your job is also to put forward alternatives.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Thank you, and I call now on the Independent and Parties Technical Group, Deputy Catherine Connolly.
You lost the election, and we're getting
Deputy Catherine Connolly.
Mil magad the Cancórla agus a híisi faríor géir tá orm díru is jahar chahar na Galway verís agus an aspa infrastructure atá e curbach larger tille ferberha agus de warna sturma tá spot solas an aspa infrastructure agus tá sé seo ordaí go minic agus faríor tá orm orda verís. Taoiseach, I'm raising the lack of infrastructure in Galway that is a serious block to development. A city that's one of 5 cities identified in the national plan to grow. One of the 5 cities destined to grow and go to a population of 120,000 by 2040. And that is not possible. And let me start just by saying that the results of the storm in Galway City and County, particularly the county, was one of the worst hit. And as I stand here today 2,750 homes, businesses and farms are still without power in Galway. You've described it as an unprecedented storm. It was. But we were well warned about it, and something I raised this morning. But I'm using my time now to look at how that's put the focus on the difficulties we have in Galway for further development. And we were at a presentation last week, and your ministers were there at it, and there were 11 projects highlighted. But top of the list, not with the way it was laid out, but verbally, was Galway City flood defences and the urgent need for them to be progressed. They started years ago, the plan for it, 9 million, it went to 50 million. Your colleague beside you is very familiar with it, the Minister, in relation to it. We were told in no uncertain terms, unless that project goes ahead, there can't be development in Galway. On top of that, we have an inadequate wastewater treatment structure as we have it. The collection network has been described as inadequate. A recent engineering report commissioned by the Uisce Éireann said one of the siphons under the Corrup estuary was in imminent danger of collapse. So we have an inadequate collection network. We have failure to build a wastewater treatment plant on the east side of the city. We have no wastewater treatment plant in Carraroe. And then in Clifton, we have a treatment plant that's not up to the capacity in the summertime. So the reason I'm mentioning all of this, Minister Taoiseach, is you're aware of it and I'm aware of it. And unfortunately, there's been no progress. The City Council in Galway and the county tell us they're 2 of the worst funded local authorities in the country. And these are major projects. So we have a national development plan and a framework telling us that Galway is going to grow. What I'm highlighting today for you is there are sustainable solutions to this. And actually, it breaks my heart to watch what's happening in Galway in terms of traffic congestion and bad planning.
Deputy.
I'll get a chance to come back in. Thank you.
Taoiseach, please.
Well, look, I want to thank Deputy Connolly for raising the issue of infrastructure. I do want to get straight to that, but I do just want to acknowledge the huge impact that the storm has had on people right across the country, and most particularly people in the West and the Northwest. And I'm very conscious of the fact that we can read out figures showing how many people have been reconnected to power, and very good progress has been made. But that is obviously comfort to the 12,000 people, 12,000 premises, Cian Corla, that remain without power today. And as you rightly say, Deputy, 2,750 of them in your own city and county of Galway. I want to obviously thank the over 3,000 ESB workers working on the front line in very difficult conditions, repairing power. And indeed, I want to thank our European and British colleagues who joined in that assistance. It's very clear. That phrase, lessons learned, is a bit of a hackneyed phrase in politics. Never has it been more true, though, I think, in terms of the preparedness that we need to carry out now for adverse weather events. It's absolutely clear that we're seeing a very significant change in the climate, that we're seeing a very significant increase in severe weather events, and that resilience and preparedness that we need to build up nationally and locally is so important. But your question today specifically follows on from that, because adverse weather events, I suppose, highlight the vulnerabilities that we can experience in certain parts of the country, indeed in all parts of the country, in relation to infrastructure as well. I'm pleased that that meeting took place with the city, with the city and council, and I know my colleague Minister Naughton was there as well, as you say. And we stand ready as a government at the start of this new mandate, and Mr. Connolly was there too, to work with Galway City Council, Galway County Council, in relation to those infrastructure projects, and indeed the list that they've provided you with. I understand when it comes to things like the flood defence scheme, Corrib Custis scheme, that is the funding is in place. But I think the frustration that often drives people crazy in this country is the length of time it gets from an announcement of a scheme or a planned scheme to the delivery on the ground. And that's why, as we negotiated our new programme for government, we have placed a very strong emphasis on infrastructural delivery. We're going to see a very significant uplift, Deputy, in capital spending. That's objectively true. I think it'll get up to 95 billion by the end of this government's term. But actually, I think key for our citizens is going to be, well, did you get the value for money and did you deliver the projects in an efficient and timely manner? And I know that will apply to Galway as well. That's why we have plans to expand the role of the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, with a particular focus on infrastructure delivery, and a new division established within that department to drive that forward as well. So I'm very happy to work constructively with you and with Galway TDs in terms of those infrastructural projects, be it the wastewater treatment plant, be it the flood defence scheme as well. I would also point out, and you'd expect me to, that Galway has obviously seen a significant amount of investment over the last number of years, whether that's in relation to the train station, whether it's in relation to URDF funding, whether it's in relation to the new facility at your hospital as well, and plans for further developments, and our commitment to try and get this ring road project moving too. But I accept there's a lot more we need to do.
Deputy Connolly.
Thank you, Taoiseach. This is a city that's struggling. It's thriving. It's a beautiful city. It's Cork okay? Agus tá lán fostiíochta an. Ach tá bacana an we've infrastructure. Agus níu ná iné atá na faibanna sin aganya. So we are struggling for quite some time. I'm reassured that you're telling me, maybe foolishly and innocently, that there'll be an emphasis on capital infrastructure, because I've heard that. But what I'm trying to highlight here today is, openly the City Council are telling us, if the flood defences don't go ahead in a timely manner and fund it, other development is off the table. I myself have a particular view in relation to Galway, that it should be chosen as a pilot city for sustainable development, roll out an integrated public transport, put in a light rail system. The feasibility study has confirmed it's possible, build public housing on public land and so on. Have my own personal opinions, which I'm not shy in sharing. However, the serious lack of infrastructure I'm highlighting here today as a major obstacle.
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
No, and I hear you, Deputy, and I hear the advocacy that you make on behalf of your county and your region, and for good reason. I mean, we will have a review of the National Development Plan, of our capital plans. We intend to publish that as a government during the summer period, and this will be an opportunity to map out what the increased level of capital funding will mean for the lifetime of this government, and provide that pipeline in terms of capital funding. And it will absolutely allow us not just to deliver on the capital commitments that have already been made in relation to many, many projects across our country, including in Galway, but it will also allow us add new ones. But I want to re-emphasise a point that I genuinely feel very, very strongly about, and I think it's an honest point to make, which is it can't just be about the level of funding, though that's important and we'll be increasing it. Take that bit as read. We're also going to have to look at how we can make sure processes in terms of approval are efficient, I think the word simplification needs to be put up in lights here. We need to be able to work in partnership with local authorities, with state agencies. And I don't level this at Galway County Council or City Council, by the way, but no buck passing, no that's for another agency. Come together and deliver these projects. I don't believe funding will be the challenge.
We move now to the Independent Technical Group. Deputy Michael Fitzmaurice.
Margaret, Concorda, first of all, Taoiseach, I want to wish you well in your new position. Taoiseach, 2 weeks ago tonight, the people of the West, the North West and the Midlands faced one of the toughest nights of their life with the effects of this storm. And it is still being felt and will be felt into the future. On Saturday morning, first of all, the clean-up operation began, where local communities, contractors, got together to clear roads, and I want to compliment them, and the farming community. I want to also compliment the ESB crews, who are out day and night, and the guys on the ground in the ESB are doing tremendous work. I do think there are some things higher up that the ESB might learn, and I hope today in Clonlaw and Ballinlaw, where a form is to be signed to get a contractor working to cut trees, will be done fairly rapid. We need to learn lessons from this Taoiseach, where things went wrong. Nobody can prevent a storm, but what we need to do is put appropriate measures of mitigation in place to make people's life a bit easier in a time like this. Unfortunately, people with underlying health conditions, those needing hoists, people with disabilities, newborn babies, young children or people needing peg feeding, all the different sleep apnea machines, all the different types of things that you need wouldn't work. There was absolutely no communications whatsoever because phone lines were down, and it was as if we didn't exist for those few days. I welcome Deputy Cleary's humanitarian fund, but I would ask him to look at one thing, and I will say one thing: you were always on the edge of a phone when we wanted it, but the one thing that needs to be done is to find out what's going on, because you'll pay the 100 or the 50 euro, but the rest isn't being done. People couldn't cook all week, so in actual fact, you know, the costs of generators and all of that has been huge. You know, Taoiseach, that I spoke within a government talks in relation to trees. 95% of it, and I'm a contractor myself, so 95% of everything I have seen has been a problem with trees. And I am asking you, will your government bring in a regulation and fund it that the trees round this, within 35 metres in a forestry, 30 metres on roads or near a power line or a communications line, will that be looked after? Second of all, the farming community. Farmers tonight, or in the last 2 weeks, there is sheds with no roof the cows are calving. Will there be a fund brought out for that? Because that's ferociously important to be done. Also, wind-blown timber, huge problem. Will there be, I don't want task force or I don't want talking shops. I know that you're talking about a task force at the moment. It's pounds, shillings and pence that people need at the moment. And will you basically enforce with Irish Water? We're a local group water scheme. We had enough of cop on to get generators. Irish Water are a big operation. There is no answer or no reason that you shouldn't have water in a time like this. We should have been ready for it.
Thank you,
and will you give councils and local communities, because the lot of debris, will you give them funding to make sure that they can do a huge clean-up after this?
Thank you, Deputy.
Thanks very much, Concorda. Thank you very much, Deputy Fitzmaurice, and thanks for the constructive way you're engaging in relation to this issue. And I'm very conscious in your own constituency, this is still a very real issue. You know, while we talk about the next steps, and you rightly talk about the lessons learned, I'm conscious in many parts of the West and Northwest, we're still seeing a significant number of people, around 12,000 premises without electricity, down from 13,000 this morning, 22,000 yesterday. But this has gone on a very long time for people, and I genuinely do appreciate that. I thank you for your comments about the work of Minister Cleary. We're grateful to him for the work he's been doing and being out on the ground engaging with communities. And so far that humanitarian assistance scheme has been paid out to over 4,000 claims have been paid out. I think over 800,000 euro paid out to date, and we've been prioritising, I suppose, putting a focus particularly on those who've been without power, or indeed those who are most vulnerable. And houses who lost power and submitted claims for costs will have those claims dealt with as soon as possible. I want to provide your constituents with that assurance. I take the point you make in the way you subtly but rightly differentiated between the ESB and the ESB crews. I want to thank the ESB crews, the over 3,000 men and women out doing incredible work. I do think there are absolutely lessons to learn for the ESB and for Ishgaren, for government departments, for agencies, for local authorities. You know, there's just no doubt about that. Even in a country as small geographically as Ireland, the response varied very significantly depending on which county you happen to live in. And we need to really look at that and look at how there's a much more standard and consistent approach. We need to look at how we can support the communities to be more resilient. I take the point you make. I was in Monaghan recently engaging with the civil defence and others. Phone network had gone down there as well. They were dusting off old phones in the civil defence, old technology if you like. It was the only technology left working. So what do you do when the technology goes down? We can manage to do this in many parts of the world. Surely we can manage to do this here in this country as well. I think you're right on trees, and I think we're going to have to make big calls in relation to this situation. You've spoken to me about this before, but the idea that we're spending millions, and in this storm a hell of a lot more than that, restoring power lines that have been knocked down by trees and then putting the lines back up and then the trees again. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, and it is a danger, and government is considering all options in relation to that. I would make the point that the ESB already has, I suppose, significant powers, and we need to consider if there is a need for any further clarity in relation to that. My colleague, the Minister for Agriculture, and the Minister of State, Michael Healy-Rae, yesterday had a specific meeting on that issue of windblow. I'm conscious the TAM scheme is available for farmers too, but we do need to see if there's gaps that need to be plugged there, and we remain engaged. So I'm ruling nothing out, Deputy, nor is the government. We're keeping an open mind in terms of engaging constructively. There will be task forces and reports to review, absolutely, but that's separate and distinct to helping people in the here and now with the emergencies that I know they're feeling in their home, in their business and on their farm.
Thank you, Deputy Fitzmaurice.
I welcome your comments on trees, but the one thing I would say, this needs to be put into a regulation, funded, because no more of this talk can go on. We can never endure what we're after enduring. The one thing I would ask the Minister for Trade and Enterprise to look at small businesses that has been closed over the last week, and some of them are going into 2 weeks now. There's a lot of places that don't have power yet. I would ask Minister for Rural Affairs, community hubs, a generator that a doctor can set up. We need to look at that. We need to learn. I would ask you on the farmers, because TAMS, I do appreciate there isn't a generator grant, but there isn't for old sheds that the roof has gone off and no insurance. So I think we need movement on that rapid. Generators are a thing in rural areas that we need to look at and encourage and try and bring some in. But the one thing that needs to be done, on the NBI, there has been a lot of money spent by the taxpayers of this country, a fabulous thing, the broadband. But the problem is it's decimated at the moment. Air, and I have no great faith in Air because they'll hardly fix the phone for you. Now to mind go putting up the poles that we need to put up. Air will need to be brought to task to make sure that they replace the infrastructure, because our broadband, the NBI broadband, is running out. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Look, you're speaking a lot of common sense in relation to this. The government's going to engage with the local authorities in relation to generators for communities. I mean, that is one of the most kind of obvious things that we should be doing in terms of making sure that there are more generators available in communities for when things like this happen. You're right, nobody can stop the storm. What we do have to do, though, is be better prepared in terms of resilience and infrastructure at that local level. And I do think it's important in any review. Of course, we look at national response, absolutely, but we also need to look at the on-the-ground response. You mentioned the word community. I mean, one of the good things we've seen from this very difficult time is community coming together. And I'm actually delighted that we've been investing in things like sports capital grants and stuff, because thank God now we have more GA clubs and football clubs with showers and with changing room facilities that they've put to use for communities at this very difficult time. The Minister for Communications here beside me, Minister O'Donovan, is bringing in all the telecommunications companies next week to specifically engage on a number of those issues. My understanding is the vast majority of NBI customers now have their connection back, but we are going to engage with those companies, and I'll come back to you in each of the specific matters, including the agricultural point you made.
Thank you. And now we move to questions on promised legislation, and we begin with Leader or Deputy Clerk Curran of Sinn Féin. Thank you.
So workers in disability services and GP out of hours are among the hardest working healthcare professionals in the state. Without their commitment, so many of the services relied on by so many simply would not exist. Yet these workers are being paid less than their public sector counterparts for doing exactly the same work, and not marginally less, but by 15% or more. In October 2023, through the WRC, the government recognised workers in the sector were underpaid, and you committed at that time to fully dealing with the issue. We're now more than a year later and there is still no resolution. We know talks broke down late last year because it became clear that the negotiating team on the government side were not given a mandate to actually implement the WRC agreement and deliver pay parity. This is a commitment in both the election manifesto of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael to deliver pay parity. The programme for government does not mention Section 39 organisations or pay parity at all. So, Taoiseach, I want to ask you, will you mandate the department officials to implement the WRC agreement in full, and will you deliver the pay parity for these Section 39 workers?
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
Yes, we will provide that mandate, and the Deputy Corran is right to highlight this issue. These health and social care workers and others carry out an absolutely invaluable service. Our health services, our social care services, our disability services are so reliant on it. We have, I would point out, made a number of advanced steps in relation to this, including the agreement you referenced in October 2023, and state agencies have worked with service providers to administer the associated pay funding adjustments. The fact is, government did offer a further 8.5% increase in funding for pay. If you add that to the increases in October 2023, this would have provided a minimum increase of 16.5% in pay funding over a 3.5-year period if agreement had been possible. Now ministers will be seeking an early opportunity to restart engagement with unions and employers through the Workplace Relations Commission to provide certainty and progress to the sector as soon as possible.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Ivana Bacik of the Labour Party.
Taoiseach, the world looked on in disbelief this week as the US President Trump made his outrageous and brutal proposal for the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people from Gaza. The people of Gaza, and I think we all agree, have endured a horrific bombardment by Israel over many months. We've seen tens of thousands of civilians, so many children killed and injured, the entire infrastructure in the enclave destroyed and devastated. And at this time, it's all the more important that we in Ireland would stand firm in solidarity with the people of Gaza and the people of Palestine and take strong action against Israel. And Taoiseach, before the general election, it seemed that all parties in this House, government and opposition, agreed on the urgent need to pass the Occupied Territories Bill that was first introduced by Senator Francis Black. Last night's debate gave rise to immense concerns for all of us across opposition that you in government were rowing back in somewhere, watering down the commitment on the Occupied Territories Bill. So my question is simple. Will you commit to giving effect to the bill within a set time frame to ensure that we have law in Ireland that would end trade in goods and services with the occupied Palestinian territories?
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
Well, thanks very much to Deputy Bacik. And look, I firstly agree with your comments in relation to the dire humanitarian catastrophe, and that phrase I'm using doesn't even capture the sense of destruction and loss of life, of home, of dignity that people have experienced in Gaza. And I think all of us are united in working on that, and I want to see what more government can do to help with the upscaling of humanitarian aid and assistance to the people of Palestine now, and standing by UNRWA at this challenging time too. I would just say on the Occupied Territories Bill, I think it's important that government's position isn't misrepresented in relation to this. In fairness to the Taoiseach, when he was before the Foreign Affairs Committee with legal advisors from the Department of Foreign Affairs just before the last election, it was made extraordinarily clear that the bill in its current form wasn't legally permissible and would require a very, very, very significant changing. So we had a discussion in this House last night about opposition would be happy to work with government on technical change. We do have to be truthful. If the law is to be permissible, if it's to be compliant with EU law, it does require more than technical change. And I'm very happy to engage with opposition on this, and I intend to meet Senator Black myself in the coming days. And I'll come back to you on a time for
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Cian O'Callaghan, Social Democrats.
Taoiseach, in 2023, Women's Aid received its highest ever number of domestic abuse disclosures in its 50-year history. 40,048 disclosures of domestic abuse against women and children, an increase of nearly 20% in a year. Among the horrors being experienced by women behind closed doors were assaults with weapons, constant surveillance, rape and threats to life. Much of this violence happens in secret. In fact, secrecy is what makes domestic violence so damaging and so endemic. That's why a domestic violence register is so important. Taoiseach, the family of Jenny Poole, who was murdered by her former partner in 2021, have led the campaign to create such a register. Before he became Minister for Justice, Jim O'Callaghan supported them. However, the programme for government makes no mention of it. Taoiseach, women need this information. Their lives could depend on it. Why isn't the creation of a domestic violence register a priority for this government?
Taoiseach. for
Well, thanks very
response.
much, Deputy O'Callaghan, for raising this extraordinarily important issue, and one that we've worked on across this House in the last period of time, including publishing an extraordinarily ambitious domestic, sexual and gender-based violence strategy led by my colleague, Minister McEntee, and establishing a new agency called CUAN to drive that zero-tolerance approach in relation to this. When I was Minister for Justice, I had the absolute honour of meeting Jason, Jenny's brother, who has been rightly, as you say, campaigning for what he calls Jenny's Law. And within that is a very sensible proposal, in my view, in relation to how you get to the domestic violence register. I do know Minister O'Callaghan is very committed to addressing the important issue and making sure that there are effective measures in place so that the Gardaí can issue confidential warnings to persons who may be at risk of in an intimate relationship. That's ultimately the aim of what needs to be achieved. Work is ongoing in the Department of Justice, and I know engagement will take place on this.
Thank you, Taoiseach. The Independent and Parties Group, Deputy Paul Murphy.
Ceann Comhairle. Taoiseach, the programme for government refers to all parties and groupings party to the government. And my question is very simple. Which groupings are party to the government, and what agreements exist with them? Elsewhere, the programme refers to support resources being made available to, quote, others who support the government. Who is being referred to there? Am I right in assuming that the groupings referred to are the Lowry Group and the Healy-Rae Group, and the others being referred to are those members of those groups who are not ministers in the government? What agreements exist? Is there an agreement that those members who are not in the government will vote with the government throughout the course of the term, or is it that they will vote on a case-by-case basis? Are there any other aspects to this agreement that the House should be aware of, and are there any other agreements in relation to government support?
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
So firstly, I think it must be highly insulting to independent TDs who are independent TDs, democratically elected, just like you in their own right, to be referred to by somebody else's surname. And I think you should really stop that sort of carrying. No, sorry. So you don't need to. Sorry, you don't need to back and forth. Last time I checked, they're called the Regional Independents. And Minister Sean Canny here sits with us in Cabinet, Minister Grealish as well. I see Deputy Toole up there. Earlier, Minister Boxer Moore and soon-to-be Minister Harkin and the two Deputy Healy-Rae. Like you could actually recognise them as individuals in their own right. Might actually respect the mandate of their constituents.
Deputy.
Sorry, does he get one question or just to barrage me? So thank you. So the next thing is this: there are the deals, if you want to call it the deals, called the Programme for Government. It's published on gov.ie. It'll be implemented in full over the course of 5 years. There are no other deals, and we look forward to advancing it.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Sorry, Deputy Regional Group.
The Regional
Deputy,
Independent Group.
Excuse me.
Sorry.
Taoiseach.
Groupings are for you, actually.
We've moved on the Independent Group. Deputy Paddy Tobin.
Garmina Margaret, Taoiseach, I have another.
Taoiseach, please.
Taoiseach, I have another example of your Gucci government wasting money at the moment. The Hill of Tara is one of the most important national monuments in the country. It is poorly served by the OPW in terms of an interpretive centre that's closed more than it's open, and muddy paths for visitors. But there is a new addition. The OPW have been building the Great Wall of Tara, and the OPW have been building this wall for the last 14 years. It's an incredible length of time. Even in your glacial delivery of projects, 14 years must be a record, Taoiseach. They told me that they spent €124,000 just on the materials for it, not including labour costs. They won't give me the labour costs, but knowing that the Office of Posh Walls spent a lot of money on labour costs, no doubt it's 3 or 4 times that figure. Now, you said before, a couple of weeks ago, that you were going to overhaul the OPW. Can you tell me how that's going?
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
Well, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Deputy, and I'll ask the Minister for the OPW to come back on the specific project that you've referenced. Absolutely. Look, I would point out that the OPW have assured government that they have taken steps to enhance their own governance procedures to ensure that value for money is achieved in delivery of projects. The government's absolutely committed to achieving value for money on all public infrastructure projects, and our programme for government made a commitment to ensure that the OPW and its structures deliver the best value for money outcomes on all projects it's responsible for. The OPW have implemented enhanced governance measures since issues have arisen, and have commissioned an external audit to inform further measures which may be required for projects moving forward. And it will be for the Minister for the OPW to bring forward to Government any proposals in terms of how he's going to advance that programme for government commitment.
Thank you. Thank you, Taoiseach. Thank you, Deputy. We move now to Fianna Fáil's Deputy Malcolm Byrne.
Taoiseach, it's my privilege for the first time as a Deputy for the new Wicklow Wexford constituency to speak here. I look forward to representing it, and I know it's a constituency with both South Wicklow and indeed North Wexford, which you have a strong affinity, and I look forward to working with you and with the government to deliver for our constituents and for the country generally. I want to raise the question around legislation concerning nicotine inhaling devices, or vapes. As you know, the last government banned the sale of these devices to under-18s, but legislation was prepared which would deal with the scourge of disposable vapes, which is now one of the major causes of litter in all our towns, as well as dealing with the issue of flavoured vapes and packaging that is designed particularly to target young people. I know Minister Donnelly prepared the legislation. I have discussed this with Minister Karen McNeill, and she's keen to move on it. I'd like your assurance that as soon as possible the government would address this public health crisis.
Thanks so much. Thank you to Deputy Byrne and indeed on your inaugural comments in your new role as a TD for Wicklow Wexford, and I wish you well and look forward to working with you, being from the neighbouring constituency of Wicklow. You're right, I think the last government and indeed our former colleague Minister Stephen Donnelly showed great leadership in terms of the issue of vaping and bringing forward very important and progressive public health legislation around this, and absolutely the new Minister for Health, Minister Jennifer Karen McNeill, and this government are committed now to taking further steps. I think we're seeing growing evidence in relation to the public health concerns and damage, and indeed the broader issue that you make in terms of litter and environmental concerns, and I'll ask the Minister to revert to you with a timeline.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Frank Feehan. No. And we have Deputy Donna McGettigan, Sinn Féin. Thank you.
Guramagat Concorla. I'm honoured to be here today, first TD for Shannon in County Clare where I'm from, but it wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the people of Clare, my family, party activists and those who have gone before me. Taoiseach, the number of patients in trolleys in University Hospital Limerick continue to be consistently the highest in the state. Over 6,000 patients left UHL emergency department before completing treatment last year. The number of patients in trolleys for January of this year is 2,234. That's an increase of 161 on this time last year. The situation has deteriorated. In Clare, we've had a high number of profile deaths caused by the crisis in UHL. And this is not only distressing to the families left behind, but it is also distressing to the constituents in Clare, some of whom have told me that they would rather stay at home than risk an India war zone type situation. What immediate steps will this government take, given that this crisis has been continuing since the NS24 A&E was closed in 2009?
Thank you. Taoiseach.
Thanks very much, congratulations to McGettigan on her election to the Dáil. I wish you well. And you're right to highlight the issue of University Hospital Limerick. I know it's a major issue for your constituents and for people in the Midwest more broadly. I could quote figures showing the increased budget, the increased staffing and the increased beds that have taken place, but I accept there is much more to do. That's why the previous Minister for Health, as your colleague Deputy Cullinne will know, last year asked HIQA to lead a review into urgent and emergency care capacity in the Midwest region, including consideration of the need for a second ED. An interim update is expected this month and the final report is expected in May, and that will guide government's next steps.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Sean O'Farrell, Fianna Fáil.
Ceann Comhairle agus tá buíocht that mé raibhnú can catch the cord. You might indulge me for a few seconds if you would, Ceann Comhairle, because I want to take the opportunity to express my personal sympathies to the Aga Khan, His Highness Prince Karim Aga Khan, who is a major investor in this country over many decades, the owner of many stud farms, invested heavily in the bloodstock sector, generated much employment, was himself a true altruist and peace promoter, one of the most significant philanthropists that I've ever had the privilege of meeting in this world, and I would suggest the House might join with me in expressing sympathy to his family and the Ismaili Muslim community that he led. He loved running on the Curragh, and it's on the Curragh that I want to put my question. Page 57 of the programme for government commits the government to a conservation plan for the Curragh and a new management system. I think my colleague, Minister Martin Hayden, was most instrumental in ensuring that provision in the programme for government. But it's absolutely essential, Taoiseach, that it is actioned now. We have seen year after year incursions onto the Curragh where it's become a vast illegal holiday camp site. 185,000 was the cost of rehabilitating the place last year, half the cost of our famous bike shed. It was a humiliation to me that I could do nothing to get the state agencies to resolve the problem. It must have embarrassed the Taoiseach that he couldn't, and I'm asking, what is the timescale for the implementation of action so that we will not have incursions again this year?
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
Well, thanks to Deputy O'Farrell. And it's good to see you back in your role advocating for your constituents in Kildare South. I want to join with you in expressing sympathy to the family of the Aga Khan on his passing, and indeed to the community he led. Myself and Minister Hayden discussed this only yesterday, and I know tributes have been led by our President and across the country in acknowledging the huge philanthropic contribution of the Aga Khan, and we think of him and his family at this very sad time. Thank you for raising the issue of the Curragh, which now indeed will fall within the remit of my new ministerial responsibilities. I look forward to a visit at an early stage to the Curragh to meet indeed with Oireachtas representatives from Kildare to discuss what I know is a very urgent issue. It was brought up with me directly during the canvass in Kildare, and I'll meet with you on this.
Deputy Colin Burke.
Thank you very much. Cork North Central, there's over 13.5 billion coming from Apple Computers into the Exchequer. The North Ring Road, which is north of the city, in the last 2 years, not one brown cent has been made available for the development of that strategic plan for the north side of Cork City. Yes, funding has been provided for the distributor road, which is also important. I would ask that you mentioned earlier about the capital programme, that the North Ring Road is not excluded in view of the fact that 2 years, not 1 cent provided, and that was at a time when there were 3 senior cabinet people based in Cork. I'm asking that this would be included in the capital programme, that the money for the distributor road would also be prioritised, and that project would be allowed to go ahead in the fastest possible time frame. Thank you.
Please.
I want to thank Deputy Burke for his raising of this issue, and indeed it's not the first time that he's passionately raised the importance of the Northern Distributor Road, and I know indeed that the proposal was established in the Cork Metropolitan Area Transport Strategy, and indeed it's seen as an absolutely essential, or indeed in the words of the strategy, a critical enabler of the delivery as well. My understanding is that the road only emerged as a proposal in CMATS, which was finalised in 2020, and therefore it was not part of the current National Development Plan. However, I do want to assure the Deputy that I will work with him to seek its inclusion in the revised National Development Plan, and I know how important it is to Cork and to the region, and indeed to investment.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Next is Deputy Rose Conway-Walsh, Sinn Féin.
The programme for government commits to the government to work with the voluntary sector through industrial relation mechanisms and other processes to progress pay issues that affect the delivery of disability services and the long-term viability of organisations within the sector. Yet we know that SIP2 is due to begin a ballot for strike action of up to 5,000 members working across 21 Section 39 organisations. I raised this matter with the former Minister Anne Rabbitte last October, a year on from the pay agreement being reached at the Workplace Relations Commission and the government's commitment to honour that. But nothing has happened in the meantime. We saw the treatment of Section 39 workers taking centre stage during the election campaign, thanks to Charlotte Fallon challenging yourself on the matter. At the time, you committed to prioritising the issue. Were those hollow words? What has been done in the meantime? And will the government engage directly with the unions to urgently avert the strike action? Thank you.
Well, they were clearly anything but the way you term those words, because as you rightly say, when you read the programme for government, Deputy Conway-Walsh, and you quoted it there, it does commit the government to working with the sector through the mechanisms that are available to progress the issues. And as I said to your colleague Deputy Curran when she raised this matter just moments ago, was that we have obviously seen the interim agreement in October 2023. We have seen state agencies work with service providers to administer the associated pay funding adjustments. The fact is, departments offered a further 8.5% increase in funding for pay. When you couple that with the October 2023 situation that would have seen funding for pay increase by 16.5% over a 3.5-year period. And now ministers will seek an early opportunity to restart engagement with unions and employers through the Workplace Relations Commission, because I appreciate the vital role that these workers play, but I also appreciate the number of people who depend on those services. And I know you raise it in that spirit.
The Progressive Democrats, Deputy Jennifer Whitmore.
So Fianna Fáil last year in advance of the election made a huge play on prioritising women's health. That included free hormone replacement therapy that was due to come in January. Now, this was very welcome at the time, but unfortunately January came and January went. There is still no free HRT for women. There appears to be no plan on putting it in place. So can you let me know what your government's going to do to make sure that that commitment, that promise is kept, and when will women actually see that that promise being kept?
Thank you, Deputy Thomas.
Yeah, I want to thank Deputy Whitmore for raising this, and I know this has been a source of huge frustration, indeed annoyance and anger for people wanting to know when will this become available. Budget 2025 did announce the intention to fund the medicine cost of hormone replacement therapy products prescribed to women to help manage the symptoms associated with all stages of menopause, and this is for women who have been prescribed HRT by their healthcare provider, and it applies to those products reimbursable by the HSE. The measure is not intended to cover pharmacy or GP fees. The Department of Health engaged with both the HSE and the IPU regarding the practical rollout of this measure. That engagement is ongoing, but I have spoken directly to the new Minister for Health, Jennifer Carroll McNeill. She's very determined to progress this, and I'll ask her to come back to you directly on a timeline.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Brian Stanley.
Commits to a review of the school transport scheme. Taoiseach, the biggest obstacle with the school transport scheme at the moment is the ban on over 70-year-old drivers being allowed to drive. We have the ludicrous situation where they can't drive a minibus, they can't bring 10 pupils to school under the school transport scheme, but later in the day they can drive a 72-seater full of them to the local swimming pool or on a bus tour to Dublin or Cork or Killarney. We have a crazy situation. Many of these drivers depend on this as part-time work to supplement their pension income. And I can tell you, operators are at their wits' end trying to recruit drivers. You know, they have to let these people go when they reach 70. Can I say this to you? Once they pass the eyesight test and a medical test, they should be allowed to continue. Now, I have a reply here, and I spoke to the Minister for Transport about this. The Minister for Transport came back and he said that they're committed to carrying out an independent assessment on the feasibility of removing the exclusion of drivers over 70 from the school transport scheme.
Deputy.
The assessment is a medical assessment.
Thank
it's
you,
very
Deputy.
simple. I had it
to
recently,
respond, please.
you know, because I've
Thank you,
HGV and a
Deputy.
bus licence.
Thank you, Deputy.
Once they pass it, that's it. They're fit to drive.
Taoiseach, please.
I must say I agree with you. I mean, this is a bizarre situation where somebody over the age of 70 can drive your kids in a private bus to the soccer game, the GAA game at the weekend, but can't drive them to school in a bus errand bus. So it's either safe or it's not safe. And I think the inconsistency in relation to this is quite farcical and annoying at a time we're trying to get more. I've raised this myself. It is, and I don't mean to say this in a way to infuriate you, but it is in the first instance a matter for bus errand. My colleague, the new Minister, State with Responsibility for Transport, does intend to pursue this. There are people who are perfectly healthy, perfectly fit, perfectly well able to drive buses, and the idea that they can drive any bus other than a bus errand bus doesn't cut the mustard with me.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Richard Boyd Barrett.
Since I met them during the general election, I've been advocating for 4 families, 3 of them with young children and infants who are living in council maisonettes in my area in Sallynoggin, living in absolutely deplorable conditions. Rodent infestation, black mould, damp running down the walls. One of the tenants told me this morning there was ice inside the wall because of the water running down the walls. These maisonettes have been earmarked for redevelopment, but meantime the children and the families for years now have been sick. They've submitted letter after letter to the council asking to be urgently rehoused in appropriate accommodation. It is actually, as we know from the Rialto case in Dolphin's Barn, it is a breach of their rights under the European Social Charter to be forced to live in these conditions. They should be moved, and there should be a system of prioritisation, particularly for children and families, when they are living in conditions that are making them sick and that are not fit for human habitation.
Thank you,
Will you act on this?
Taoiseach to respond, please.
If you can send my office the details, I'll engage immediately with the Minister for Housing in relation to that matter.
Thank you. Deputy Ryan O'Mara.
Housing is the single greatest issue facing my generation. I acknowledge that the delivery of housing units, particularly at scale, is the #1 priority for this government, and that is rightly so. However, one of the biggest barriers to housing and building of houses in North Tipperary and North West Kilkenny is a lack of capacity in the water and wastewater infrastructure. In Cloughjordan, my own village, we cannot build a single house because there's no capacity in the system for years. In Ballycommon, over the road from me, we're looking at 32 houses that could be built in a small village, but there's no capacity in the system to allow for that to happen. Taoiseach Uisce Éireann must be willing to meet with the developers on site in areas like Ballycommon so that they can work collaboratively on planning permissions and get houses like that built as a matter of urgency. But in areas such as Cloughjordan, we need to see a determined and ambitious investment campaign from Uisce Éireann in infrastructure, with the full force of the state ensuring that works are undertaken in record pace if we are really to tackle the housing crisis. It's one thing putting the investment in, we are all calling for that, but we need the action urgently and we need the state to intervene there.
Well, thanks to Deputy O'Meara and congratulations to him on his election representing the people of Tipperary North, and I wish him very well. The programme for government does have a number of commitments in relation to this, because you're right, housing is the biggest challenge that our country faces, and it's the biggest priority that government intends to address. But as you also rightly highlight, there's a number of enablers to build housing. It's not just the housing construction capacity, it's water, it's waste treatment facilities as well. And we're going to significantly increase the amount of money available to Uisce Éireann through the capital budgets that we'll be allocating shortly. But we do need to see in return a willingness from Uisce Éireann to make sure that projects that are crucial to housing get the go-ahead, and that also projects that might be seen as smaller in scale are also addressed too. And I'll certainly write to the Chief Executive of Uisce Éireann on the projects you've mentioned and ask that they meet with you.
Thank you. Taoiseach Deputy James Gagan.
As it's the first time I've spoken in the Dáil, I just want to thank the constituents of Dublin Bay South and my family and friends for getting me here. Taoiseach, the programme for government contains a very clear commitment